Before we dive in, I'd like to ask a small favor. I'm pouring all my energy into reaching my goal of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to me. Please, I'm asking you to hit that subscribe button. It's just a single click, but it gives me tremendous motivation to keep creating more videos. Thank you so much.
Gideon Harrington picked up the contract, met his mother's gaze with unwavering intensity, and tossed it into the fireplace. "I won't choose any of them," he declared. The flames devoured the paper in a mere 3 seconds. 14 families, 6 months of delicate negotiations, 4 lawyers, his mother's entire reputation, all consumed by fire. A hushed stillness fell over the room. Not a soul moved, not a breath was drawn. Outside, through the rain-streaked panes, a solitary figure in the mud fought on, as if the world had long since forgotten her existence. If this story stirs something within you, subscribe. Follow it to its conclusion, and share your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this reaches. The contract met the fire at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon in July of 1815, and Eleanor Harrington did not scream. That was the most terrifying part. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply stood at the far end of the east parlor, hands clasped serenely before her, and watched the paper curl and blacken in the grate. As the final corner turned to ash, she lifted her eyes to her son and said, her voice unnervingly calm, "You will regret that." "Perhaps," Gideon replied, "but not today." 14 women had gathered that morning. They had arrived in elegant carriages, clad in silk and muslin, their hair meticulously styled, accompanied by their mothers and chaperones, their most refined manners deployed like a carefully constructed shield. They had spent weeks preparing for this afternoon, rehearsing what to say, how to sit, when to laugh, when to avert their eyes. 14 families had spent months in quiet, meticulous negotiation, weighing estates, bloodlines, and the precise value of a Harrington alliance in the Massachusetts of 1815. All of them watched him. All of them watched the fire. Miss Alderton, draped in yellow silk, her pearl earrings glinting, the daughter of a Boston shipping magnate, had turned stark white. Miss Caldwell, the judge's daughter from Concord, clutched the arms of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. The youngest among them, a girl barely 18, whose name Gideon hadn't even learned, wept silently into her handkerchief. He felt the immense weight of his actions. He wasn't someone who didn't feel, he simply couldn't stop himself. "Gideon," his mother's voice, still quiet, still controlled, cut through the silence, "step outside with me. There's nothing to say outside that can't be said in here." "I disagree." "Mother." "Gideon." And there it was. That single word dropped like a stone, a weight that had held him captive since he was 7 years old. Not anger, but something far worse. Disappointment so profound, so meticulously contained, it had become its own formidable weapon. "These women came here in good faith," she continued, her voice low. "Whatever your feelings about the arrangement, they deserve. They deserve better than this," he finished for her. "That is precisely my point." He turned to face the assembled women. 14 pairs of eyes met his. He hadn't wanted to do this in front of them. He hadn't planned to burn the contract. That impulse had seized him before he could even consciously decide, the way certain actions unfold, the body moving with an instinct that forces the mind to scramble to catch up. But he was here now, and they were looking at him, and he owed them some measure of honesty. "I'm sorry," he said. "I truly mean that. Not as a social nicety, but genuinely. You came here because your families asked you to. You sat in this room, and you did everything correctly. Every single one of you." He paused. "And I cannot stand here and choose one of you as if selecting a plot of land. I cannot do it. That is not a reflection on any of you. It is entirely my own failing." Silence descended. Then Miss Caldwell, the judge's daughter, the one with the death grip on her chair, spoke with measured care. "Is there someone else?" The question landed in the center of the room like a dropped glass. Gideon opened his mouth, and outside, through the window behind him, came a sound, a crash. Sharp, sudden, and utterly unrefined, the sound of something heavy striking mud, followed immediately by a single word, short, vicious, and entirely unsuitable for the east parlor of Harrington Estate. Every head turned. Through the storm-lashed glass, barely discernible in the driving rain, a figure, small, dark-haired, on one knee in the mud beside a tilted carriage, both hands pressed flat to the ground, pushing herself upright with the practiced efficiency of someone who had fallen before and intended to stay up for as long as possible. She rose, looked at her hand, bleeding visibly even from this distance, looked at the carriage, uttered something to the sky, then crouched back down and began to dig. Gideon stared. "That," Miss Caldwell remarked, her voice bone-dry, "is not an answer to my question." "No," he conceded. "It isn't." He continued to watch. The girl-woman had found a stick and was using it as a lever against a wheel spoke, jamming it into the mud at an angle, throwing her weight against it. It wasn't working. The wheel was too deeply mired. But she didn't falter. She adjusted the angle, repositioned her feet, tried again. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and she repeatedly pushed it back with her forearm between attempts, a repetitive, unbothered gesture, always returning to the wheel. "Who is she?" he asked. "Gideon, this is hardly the time." "Who is she?" "Mother." Eleanor Harrington pressed her lips together. "Clara Whitmore. She is a companion to Miss Abigail Whitmore, a distant relation of no particular consequence. She manages the luggage and the horses. She is not a guest. She came with the Whitmore party. She came to serve the Whitmore party. There is a difference. She's bleeding. The footmen will attend to it." The footmen were indeed standing in the doorway, observing her. "Gideon." He was already moving. He heard his mother utter his name one last time, its full weight, every syllable. The version she used when it was a command, not merely a name. He heard it, and he kept walking, pushing through the side door and out into the storm. It hit him all at once, not gradually, but in a single, overwhelming wave. The rain, the wind off the bay, the summer heat turned sudden and violent. The scent of wet earth and horse, and an electric tang in the air, that hadn't been present an hour ago. His coat was soaked through in 15 seconds. His boots sank into the muddy drive in 20. He didn't turn back. He found her around the side of the carriage house. She still hadn't heard him. Her back was to him, both hands and all her weight pressed against the carriage's left panel, now trying a different approach, speaking softly to herself, or perhaps to the horse, or perhaps to the carriage itself. The bay mare at the front had her ears pinned back and her head low, a clear indication she had ceased cooperating some time ago and had no intention of resuming. "That angle won't work." Gideon's voice was clear. She spun around, fast, faster than he'd expected. Not startled precisely, but more like someone whose reflexes had been honed by a life that offered little warning. Her eyes found him immediately and didn't waver. They were dark, sharp, and engaged in a rapid assessment of who he was and what threat he represented. He held his hands up slightly, not in surrender, but simply to be seen. "The mud is deepest on the left side," he said. "If you push from that angle, you're working against the sink. You need leverage on the right." She looked at him, looked at the carriage, looked back at him. "You're Gideon Harrington," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes. You own this property." "Yes. You have." She glanced briefly toward the house. "A parlor full of guests." "I'm aware." "And you came out here to give me carriage advice." "Among other things." Her eyes narrowed, not with hostility, but with the focused intensity of someone who had learned that unexpected kindness often came with a hidden price, and she wanted to find it before agreeing to anything. "What other things?" "Your hand is bleeding." She glanced at her palm. The cut ran from the base of her index finger toward her wrist, not deep, but long, the kind of cut that stung dully, bled persistently, and would make every action with that hand slightly more difficult. She pressed it against her skirt, observed the dark stain it left, and looked back at him. "I've had worse," she said. "I believe you. So, that's not a reason to come out in a storm." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She waited. She waited. The rain fell between them. She was utterly drenched. Her dress, her hair, everything. And she stood in it, as if it were a mere condition of life, not a crisis. As if she had made her peace with discomfort a long time ago, and no longer expected anything from the weather. "Then why?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. "Because," he said, "you were the only honest thing I could see from that window." Something shifted in her expression. Not softening. Not yet. Something more cautious. The peculiar look of someone who had received an unexpected answer and wasn't quite sure whether to trust it. "That's a strange thing to say," she remarked. "Yes. To a stranger. Yes. In the middle of a storm." "That part I'll grant you." A beat of silence. She glanced toward the house again. The illuminated windows, the figures visible within the carefully composed world of the east parlor, carrying on without him. "They'll be talking about you," she said. "They already are." "You burned the contract." It wasn't a question. She stated it flatly, plainly, like a fact she had already had time to process. He stared at her. "How do you know about the contract?" "Sound carries in old houses," she said simply. "Especially to the rooms where the servants wait." He hadn't considered that. He probably should have. "Does that bother you?" she asked. "That I know?" "No," he said, and to his slight surprise, it was true. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she turned back to the carriage, planted her shoulder against the right panel, the side he had indicated, and glanced back at him. "Well," she said, "you're already wet. Might as well be useful." Something stirred within his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He moved to the left side, found his footing in the mud, and braced both hands against the frame. "On 3, she said. "On 3. 1, 2, 3, they both declared. They pushed. The carriage groaned, shuddered. For one long moment, nothing happened. Just resistance, just mud, just the two of them in the rain, and the stubborn weight of the thing. And then, with a slow, sucking release that felt almost like surrender, the wheel came free. The frame leveled. The mare lifted her head in surprise. Clara stumbled sideways. Her injured hand grazed the wheel spoke, and she hissed a short, sharp, involuntary sound before catching herself and straightening, pressing the hand against her ribs. "You're all right," he said. "Fine." The word came out clipped. A reflex. Then, after a pause, quieter. "Thank you." He nodded. They stood for a moment, both catching their breath, the storm easing around them as summer storms often did, quickly, as if they'd already moved on to somewhere else and hadn't bothered to mention it. The rain was thinning. The thunder had rolled east. The sky above the carriage house had shifted from pewter to pale silver. "Come inside," he said. "Your hand needs to be cleaned." She turned to look at him. "Inside," she repeated. "The house." "Yes, where 14 women are sitting in your parlor. That's the one." She let out a breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Something in between. Something weary and wary, and underneath it, almost amused. "Mr. Harrington, I am a nobody. I came here to mind horses and carry bags. I don't belong in that house as anything other than—" "I know what you are," he said. "I'm asking anyway." "Why?" He thought about it. He could have said something polished. He could have said something careful. He was good at careful. 4 years of managing estates, lawyers and creditors had made him very good at careful. "Because," he said, "I burned a contract this afternoon, and I don't know exactly what comes next, but I know I am not going back into that parlor and choosing a name off a list." He met her gaze directly. "And I know that whatever happens next, I'd rather face it in the same room as someone who speaks their truth." Clara Whitmore held his eyes for a long moment. The wind whispered through the elm trees. The mare tossed her mane and snorted, a sound of impatience, of being utterly finished with the afternoon. Somewhere across the drive, a door opened and shut. "One condition," Clara said. "Name it. You don't introduce me to your mother tonight." He almost smiled. "That's all?" "That's enough," she said, "for now." She took the mare's bridle, clicked her tongue twice, and began walking toward the stable, unhurried, the deliberate pace of someone who set their own rhythm, impervious to the stirrings around them. Gideon stood in the thinning rain, watching her go. His coat was ruined. His boots were beyond salvaging. His mother was in that parlor with 14 families, and a fire that had consumed 6 months of negotiations. And tomorrow, There would be consequences he couldn't yet fathom. He knew all of that. He stood there anyway. And for the first time in 4 years, for the first time since he'd stood beside his father's grave in the cold October earth and felt the full weight of the Harrington name settle onto his shoulders, like a burden he'd never asked to carry. Gideon Harrington felt a subtle shift in his chest, small, quiet, but undeniably real. Clara had the mare settled and the tack hung before anyone came looking for her. She'd known someone would come. That was the nature of houses like this. They had long arms. Staff who guarded doors, who reported back through hallways that carried information like rivers carrying water, quietly, constantly, and without being asked. She'd worked in enough of them to understand the cadence. Someone always came. She just hadn't anticipated it would be the housekeeper. Mrs. Hale was a tall, thin woman, the kind sculpted by a lifetime of relentless activity, with little time for self-indulgence. She appeared in the stable doorway, a lamp in one hand, her expression a carefully crafted blankness that Clara recognized as its own form of communication. "Mr. Harrington requests that you come inside," Mrs. Hale said. "Mr. Harrington can request what he likes," Clara replied, her gaze fixed on the bridle she was hanging. "I'm not a guest." He was aware you might say something like that. A beat of silence. "He asked me to tell you that the side entrance is unlocked, that his mother is currently occupied in the east parlor, and that there is hot water and clean linen in the kitchen if you'd like to see to your hand before anyone notices you're there." Clara paused. That was specific. That was a man who had considered her objections before she'd even voiced them, which was either remarkably thoughtful or unnervingly calculating. She hadn't quite decided which. "And if I say no," she asked, "then I'm to tell you that's entirely your choice and he won't send anyone again." Mrs. Hale's expression remained unyielding. Those were his exact words. Clara looked at her hand. The cut had stopped bleeding freely, but had stiffened uncomfortably, pulling with every bend of her fingers. She'd wrapped it with a strip torn from her underskirt, a makeshift bandage that was barely holding. She thought of Abigail Whitmore, somewhere inside that house in her best dress, presenting her most polished self, hoping to be chosen by a man who had just incinerated the very contract that was supposed to orchestrate the entire affair. She considered the fallout when Abigail discovered the truth. She considered the implications when Abigail learned Clara had been inside the house at Gideon Harrington's behest. "Fine," she said. "Side entrance?" Mrs. Hale nodded once and turned, wordlessly. The kitchen was warm, carrying the lingering scent of bread baked hours ago, and coffee still going. 2 young maids looked up as Clara entered, their eyes flicking over her mud-splattered state, her soaked dress, her bandaged hand, before they very deliberately returned to their tasks. It told Clara everything she needed to know about the prevailing atmosphere in the house. She found the hot water where Mrs. Hale had indicated, along with the linen. Sitting on a low stool by the hearth, she unwrapped her hand and cleaned the cut with the focused, efficient movements of someone enduring pain with the sole intention of getting through it quickly. She was halfway done when the door opened. She didn't look up. She knew the footsteps. "I said the kitchen," she stated. "I didn't say come to the kitchen." "I know," Gideon said. He'd changed his coat and was dry now, though his hair still held a trace of dampness at the edges. He pulled another stool from beside the wall without asking, and sat down opposite her, close enough to see what she was doing, far enough not to be intrusive. "How bad is it?" "It's a cut." "How bad?" She held her hand out briefly so he could see, then returned to cleaning it. He leaned forward, studied it in silence, then sat back. "It needs to be closed," he said. "It needs to be left alone." "Clara, I have had injuries that needed closing, Mr. Harrington. This is not one of them." She spoke without emotion, stating a simple fact. "It'll scar a little. I've got plenty of those." Something flickered across his face. Not pity. She would have left immediately for pity. Something more cautious than that. Something that was observing, without immediately categorizing what it saw. The 2 maids in the corner remained resolutely focused on their work, yet Clara knew they were absorbing every word. Clara tied off the linen, tested her grip, and stood. "Thank you for the water." "Sit down," he said. She looked at him. "Please," he added. And then, more softly, "I'm not ordering you. I'm asking." She sat, slowly, with the deliberate posture of someone choosing to be seated and wanting that choice to be understood. "There are things happening in this house tonight," he said, "that are going to affect you. I thought you should know what they are before you hear them from someone else." "What things?" He looked at his hands for a moment, then met her gaze. "My mother has not dismissed the guests." Clara stilled. "She's reframing the afternoon," he said. "I don't know exactly how, but my mother is very good at reframing. My guess is the burning of the contract is becoming a romantic gesture, evidence of a man who refuses to be bound by convention, someone who needs to be won rather than simply selected." He paused. "I could be wrong." "You're not wrong," Clara said. He looked at her. "I heard Mrs. Caldwell say it in the hallway 20 minutes ago," Clara stated plainly. "He's not a man you catch, he's a man you earn." She was saying it to her daughter, like it was good news. She paused. "Your mother is very good." "Yes," Gideon said. "She is." "So nothing has changed?" "Something has changed," he said. His voice was quiet, but the certainty in it struck her differently than she'd expected. "I've changed. Those women don't know it yet. My mother doesn't believe it yet. But I know what I did this afternoon, and I know why I did it, and I'm not walking it back." Clara looked at him for a long moment. The fire crackled behind her. In the corner, one of the maids dropped a spoon, then picked it up, her movements suddenly frozen. "Mr. Harrington?" Clara said carefully. "What exactly do you think happened this afternoon?" "What do you mean?" "You came outside in a storm. You helped me with a carriage. You said something very striking about honest things and windows, and now you're sitting in your kitchen at—" She glanced at the clock on the wall. "4:30, telling me about your mother's strategy." She met his eyes. "What is it you think this is?" He didn't answer immediately. That was the first thing that surprised her. She'd expected deflection, the smooth social pivot of a man who had navigated drawing rooms his entire life. Instead, he sat with the question, turned it over, took it seriously. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "but it's the truth." She studied him. The fire was a comforting warmth at her back. Her hand throbbed dully. Somewhere deeper in the house, she could hear the faint murmur of voices, the particular layered sound of a room full of people managing a situation. And beneath it, or perhaps she was imagining it, the echo of her cousin Abigail's laugh, high and practiced, aimed at precisely the right moment. "My cousin is in that parlor," Clara said. "I know. She came here because her family is in debt, and a Harrington match would solve it." She stated it plainly, without softening. "She told me that. She was honest about it, at least. She's not a bad person. She's just in a bad situation." "Most of them are," Gideon said quietly. "Then you understand that what you're doing, the burning, the gestures, whatever this is," she gestured between them, "lands on them, all 14 of them. Not just you." "Yes." "And you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Because the alternative was worse. Worse for you, worse for everyone. A man who marries where he doesn't choose becomes a particular kind of cruel, Clara. I've seen it. My father was a good man, a genuinely good man, and he married where he was told, and he was kind to my mother, and she was kind to him, and for 30 years they were perfectly, quietly, completely miserable." His voice didn't rise. It just flattened, the way voices did when they were carefully masking something. "I am not doing that. Not to myself, not to whoever I marry, not to whatever children we'd have." The kitchen had fallen utterly silent. Clara realized the two maids had stopped moving entirely. "You two can go," Gideon said without looking at them. They left, quickly, with the energy of people who had just heard something they fully intended to share later, but were wise enough to know now wasn't the moment. The door clicked shut. Clara and Gideon sat across from each other in the warm kitchen, the fire crackling, the storm entirely past outside, the house humming around them like a living thing that was listening. "You're going to cause a great deal of trouble," Clara said. "I already have. More than you've caused so far?" "Probably." "And you're comfortable with that?" "No," he said. "I'm not comfortable with it. I'm just done being comfortable with the alternative. She exhaled, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. What is it you want from me, Mr. Harrington? Specifically, because I have been in enough houses to know that when a man in your position sits in a kitchen and tells an inconvenient truth to a woman in my position, he usually wants something. I want to know your name, he said. She blinked. You know my name. I know what Mrs. Hale told me. I know what my mother's voice sounded like when she said it. He leaned forward slightly. I want to hear it from you. It was such a small thing. It was such a strange, specific, small thing, and it struck her in a place she hadn't been expecting, and she had to hold herself very still for a moment to ensure her face didn't betray it. Clara Whitmore, she said. Where are you from? Clara Whitmore. Providence, she said, originally. And before you came to the Whitmore household? She looked at him steadily. Before is a long story. I have time. I don't. She stood again, and this time he didn't ask her to sit. I need to go check on Abigail before dinner. She'll be looking for me. He stood as well, a reflex, the courtesy so ingrained it happened without conscious thought. She noticed that, filed it away with the other observations, building a picture she wasn't sure she was ready to see clearly yet. Will you be at dinner? He asked. Staff eats in the kitchen. That wasn't the question. Yes, it was, she said. You just don't know it yet. She moved toward the door. Her hand throbbed. Her dress was still damp at the hem. Her mind was racing, cataloging and organizing, trying to process what had just happened, and whether she needed to be more worried than she already was. She had her hand on the door when he said, You're not what I expected. She turned. What would you have expected? He'd thought about it. Someone easier to predict. Easier would have stayed in the stable, she said, and walked out. She found Abigail in the third-floor room they were sharing. Or rather, Abigail had the room, and Clara had the narrow cot behind the dressing screen, which was the usual arrangement. Abigail was sitting at the vanity in her second-best dress, which meant she'd already changed from the afternoon silk, which meant the afternoon had not gone the way she'd planned. There you are, Abigail said, without turning. She was watching Clara in the mirror. You were outside. The carriage wheel sank. I know about the carriage wheel. A pause. Mrs. Hale told me you went inside the house. Clara hung her wet coat on the hook behind the door. My hand was cut. She offered hot water. Mrs. Hale doesn't offer things without being asked. Then someone asked. Silence. Abigail turned on the vanity stool to look at her directly. She was pretty in the conventional way. Fair, careful, the kind of looks that photographed well and suited parlor light. But her eyes were sharp. She had not survived 2 years in her family's financial decline by being unobservant. He came outside, Abigail said. During the gathering, he left 14 women sitting in the parlor and went out into a storm. She paused. For you. He came outside, Clara said carefully. I was there, that's all. Clara. Abigail's voice dropped. Don't. Not angry. Not yet. Something more complicated than anger. Something that was trying to stay controlled and wasn't quite managing it. I have been sitting in that parlor all afternoon, performing myself for a man who wasn't even looking at me. Do you understand what that feels like? I sat there and smiled and said the right things and wore the right dress, and he stood at the window the entire time, like the room wasn't even happening. She stopped, pressed her hands flat to her thighs, and then he left. For you. I don't know what you think. I think he looked at you through the window, Abigail said. I think I saw his face when he turned around. I've been watching men's faces my whole life, Clara. It's the only skill my mother made sure I had, and I know what a man's face looks like when something has gotten through to him. She looked at Clara steadily. I also know what my family situation looks like if I come home empty-handed. The room was very quiet. Clara sat on the edge of the cot. I'm not doing anything, she said, and she meant it. She also knew, in the particular way of people who had learned to be honest with themselves, that not doing anything was getting harder to maintain as a position. He asked about you, Abigail said, at dinner, before you came in. He asked Mrs. Hale where you were from. He asked how long you'd been with our household. She paused. His mother heard. Clara closed her eyes, briefly. 1 second. That's a problem, Abigail said. Yes, for me, for you, for reasons that are very different, but both very real. She turned back to the mirror, picked up her brush, and began moving it through her hair with the automatic focus of someone doing something with their hands so they didn't have to think about what they were feeling. I'm not angry at you, Clara. I want you to know that. I know you didn't. I know this isn't something you asked for. Nothing has happened. Something is happening, Abigail said quietly. That's worse. Clara sat with that. Outside the room, the house had shifted into its dinner register, doors opening and closing, voices moving from parlor to hallway to dining room. The subtle orchestration of an evening event being organized by people who did this professionally. Somewhere below them, Eleanor Harrington was managing her guests and reframing her afternoon and doing all the things she did without anyone being quite sure how she did them. And somewhere in that same house, Gideon Harrington was what? Sitting at a dinner table he disrupted, looking at 14 women he'd just refused, thinking about a kitchen conversation he'd engineered. Or maybe not thinking about it at all. Maybe she was the only one sitting here cataloging it word by word like a ledger entry. Abigail, Clara said. If he doesn't choose you, I know. What will your family? I know, Clara. Abigail set the brush down. Her hands were very still now. My father's creditors are patient men. They've been patient for 2 years. They won't be patient much longer. She looked at her reflection. I need this to work. I need someone to want me enough to make it work. And I can't. Her voice broke very slightly, and she repaired it with the speed of someone who'd had a lot of practice. I can't compete with whatever that was this afternoon. Clara didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Because Abigail was right and wrong at the same time, and both of those things were real, and Clara didn't know how to hold them. She went to dinner in the kitchen, as she'd said she would. She ate quickly and said little, and listened to the other servants talk, which was always more informative than listening to the people they served. She learned that Eleanor Harrington had seated herself between Gideon and Miss Caldwell at the dinner table. She learned that Gideon had spoken to Miss Caldwell for the better part of the fish course, which Mrs. Hale reported with the careful neutrality of someone who was reporting facts and not conclusions. She learned that he had excused himself before dessert and had not returned to the table. She was clearing her plate when the kitchen door opened. Mrs. Hale stood in the doorway. Mr. Harrington would like a word, she said. Every head in the kitchen turned. Clara looked at Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale looked back with the expression of a woman who was delivering a message, not offering an opinion. Clara set her plate in the basin, wiped her hands. Where? She said. The library, Mrs. Hale said. He said to tell you the door will be open. She walked through the house alone, past the dining room, where she could hear the murmur of voices and the particular bright laughter of women performing ease, and down the long corridor toward the library. The door was open as promised. The lamp inside was low. Gideon was standing at the window again. Different window, same posture. You had dinner with Miss Caldwell, Clara said from the doorway. He turned. My mother arranged the seating. I know. She didn't move from the doorway. What did you want? He crossed the room toward her, not fast, not slow, just direct, and stopped a few feet away, close enough for a conversation, far enough for a choice. My mother is meeting with the families tomorrow morning, he said. She's telling them the afternoon was a misunderstanding, that the process is still open. Is it? No, he said. Then why are you telling me? He reached into his coat and held something out to her, a folded paper. She looked at it without taking it. What is that? A letter, he said, to my solicitor in Boston. It authorizes a sum enough for you to establish yourself independently. A room, a trade, whatever you choose. He kept holding it out. No conditions, no obligations. You take it, you leave tomorrow, and that's the end of it. Or you don't take it, and he stopped, and you stay. The fire was low. The house moved around them. Why? She said. Because I want you to have a choice, he said. A real one, not the kind where one option is impossible and the other is inevitable. A real choice. She looked at the paper. She looked at him. If I take it, she said slowly, you go back to the parlor. You choose someone from that list. Your mother gets what she wants. Yes. And Abigail's family gets what they need. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She reached out, took the letter, held it. Her hand, the cut one, trembled slightly as she held it, and she was not entirely sure whether it was the injury or something else. "I'll think about it," she said. She walked back out into the corridor. The letter was still warm from his coat pocket, and her hand would not stop shaking. Clara didn't sleep. She lay on the narrow cot behind the dressing screen and stared at the ceiling, and listened to Abigail breathe slow and even, the sleep of someone exhausted by performance, and held the letter against her sternum like it was something that might escape if she loosened her grip. She had read it twice, then a third time, tilting it toward the thin strip of moonlight coming through the curtain gap. The sum was real. She had done the arithmetic twice, because she didn't trust herself the first time. It was enough for a year, maybe more if she was careful. Enough for Providence. Enough for a room of her own, and a trade she'd actually chosen, and mornings that belonged to no one but herself. She should take it. Every practical thought she had said, take it. Get up before the house wakes. Find Mrs. Hale. Say thank you and goodbye. Walk out the side entrance the same way she'd walked in. And don't look back. Let Abigail have her chance. Let Eleanor Harrington have her morning meeting. Let Gideon Harrington go back to his parlor and his list, and the carefully managed life that was waiting for him whether he wanted it or not. She should take it. She was still holding it at 5 in the morning when Abigail woke up. Abigail didn't say anything at first. She sat up, looked at Clara sitting on the edge of the cot, fully dressed, looked at the letter in her hand, and was quiet for a long moment. "He gave you money," Abigail said. "He gave me a choice," Clara said. "Clara?" Abigail's voice was very careful. "Those are the same thing." "No," Clara said. "They're not." Abigail looked at her for a long time. Then she got up and began dressing for the day, and she didn't say another word about it, and that silence was somehow worse than anything she could have said. The house came alive early. Eleanor Harrington had organized a breakfast gathering before the morning meeting, one last opportunity, Clara understood, for the families to present their daughters in a fresh context. Daylight instead of lamplight. Tea instead of wine. The particular soft sell of morning, when everything felt more reasonable and less dramatic than the night before. Clara carried luggage down from 3 of the rooms. She managed the horses for 2 of the carriages. She moved through the house in the way she'd learned to move through houses, efficiently, quietly, in the spaces between people, rather than through them. She did not go near the dining room. She was in the stable at 7:30, checking the mare's left foreleg. It had been favoring it slightly after yesterday's ordeal, when she heard footsteps. She already knew. She didn't turn around. "You're still here," Gideon said. "I haven't decided yet. I know how long it's been." She ran her hand down the mare's leg, felt the slight heat still present above the fetlock, and straightened. "Your horse has the beginning of a strain. She shouldn't be worked for at least 3 days. A pause. "That's not what I came to talk about." "I know." She turned. He looked like a man who hadn't slept either, which was the first time she'd felt something close to sympathy for him, and she was not sure she welcomed it. "Your mother's meeting starts at 9 o'clock. 8:30. Then you have time." She moved past him to the water bucket, washed her hands. "Ask what you actually want to ask." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you read it?" 3 times. And I'm still here." Something moved in his face. She caught it and looked away, because whatever it was, she wasn't ready to name it yet. "Clara, your mother knows," she said. He went still. Mrs. Hale told her about the kitchen, about the library. Clara dried her hands on the stable cloth. "I don't know the exact version she told, but I know Eleanor Harrington heard it before dinner was cleared, because I watched her face change when she looked at me during dessert." She paused. "I was clearing the service table. She didn't know I was watching." "What did her face do?" "It got very calm," Clara said. "The specific kind of calm that means someone has just reclassified a situation from inconvenience to problem." Gideon exhaled through his nose. "She'll move the meeting earlier. She already has. Mrs. Hale told me 40 minutes ago. 8 o'clock, not 8:30. He looked at her. "Mrs. Hale told you?" Mrs. Hale tells me things, Clara said simply. I don't know why. Maybe she's fond of me. Maybe she wants me gone and thinks information is useful for that purpose. Either way, she shrugged. Clara? He crossed the stable toward her, not fast, but deliberate. And she held her ground because she had decided, sometime in the last 10 minutes, that whatever was going to happen today, she was not going to spend it backing away. Whatever happens in that meeting, I need you to know that I am not walking back into that parlor and choosing a name. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice. You keep saying that, she said. People with money always say that. It landed. She saw it land. He didn't flinch from it, which she noted. You're right, he said. That's fair. I'm not trying to be fair. I'm trying to be accurate. She looked at him directly. You have the luxury of principle, Mr. Harrington. Most people don't. Abigail doesn't. The other 13 women in that dining room don't. When you burn a contract, you get to call it a conviction. When they leave empty-handed, they go home to consequences you will never have to see. I know that. Do you? Yes. His voice was quiet but firm. I know it. I've known it since yesterday afternoon, and I did it anyway. And that makes me selfish in a way I'm not going to argue with you about. But Clara, he stopped, tried again. I am asking you to stay. Not because of what I can give you, because... He stopped again, and she could see him searching. Actually searching the way people did when they were trying to find the real words underneath the easy ones. Because you said something to me last night about choice. About real choice versus the kind where one option is impossible. I remember. You've never had one, he said. A real one, have you? The stable was very quiet. The mare shifted behind her tail swishing. Clara felt the words land somewhere deep and accurate and unexpected, and she pressed her back teeth together and held herself very still. That, she said, is not a fair thing to say. No, he agreed. But you said we were being accurate. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then she heard it. A door. The main house door. Not the side entrance. The formal door. The one that opened onto the front of the drive. And voices. Multiple voices moving quickly with the particular energy of people who had been organized into motion. Gideon heard it too. They both turned. Through the stable opening, Clara could see the drive. 3 of the carriages were being brought around. The Caldwell carriage, the Alderton carriage, the Whitmore carriage, Abigail's carriage. She's moving them out, Gideon said, very quietly. Before the meeting. Clara said, before I can. He was already moving. Gideon. She said his name without the title, first time, and he stopped and turned, and she saw something in his face that she still wasn't ready to name. If you go out there and stop those carriages, there is no version of this morning where everyone doesn't know exactly what's happening. I know. Your mother will make this very bad for you. I know. And for me. Clara, I know you know, she said. I'm not trying to stop you. I'm telling you to be sure. He looked at her. I'm sure, he said. Then he walked out. She followed. She told herself she was following to watch, to be present for whatever was about to happen, so she could account for it properly afterward, to be a witness and not a participant. She told herself that, and she almost believed it. She got as far as the stable door. Gideon reached the drive at the same moment his mother reached the front steps. Eleanor Harrington was dressed with the precision of someone who had been awake for hours and had used every one of them productively. She had the families arranged. Clara couldn't see all of them from where she stood, but she could see Mrs. Caldwell and the youngest girl whose name she still didn't know, and at the far edge of the group, Abigail, standing slightly apart from the others with her traveling case at her feet. Abigail saw Clara in the stable doorway. Their eyes met. Abigail looked away first. Mother, Gideon said, stop. Good morning, Gideon. Eleanor's voice was pleasant, impeccably pleasant. I'm simply arranging the carriages for our guests. Given the events of yesterday, I thought an early departure would be, don't. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Don't manage this. Not right now. I am not managing anything. You moved the meeting. You had the carriages brought around before I was out of bed. He stopped in front of her. You're trying to resolve this before I can affect it. I know. I know how you work, and I know why you do it, and I know you think you're protecting me. A beat. You're not. Stop. A silence moved through the assembled group like weather. Mrs. Caldwell's daughter was gripping her mother's arm. Abigail had gone very still. Eleanor looked at her son for a long moment. Her expression did not change. That was the thing about her. Her expression never changed when the thing it was managing was at maximum pressure. She'd learned or been taught, or simply developed the absolute concealment of feeling, under circumstances where feeling was a liability. "There is a young woman," Eleanor said very quietly, "in my stable." "Yes," Gideon said, "a companion, a servant, a girl with no family name worth speaking of, and no means, and no position, and nothing to offer this estate or this family, except—" She stopped, visibly contained something. "I have spent 40 years building what you are about to dismantle, Gideon. 40 years. I know that. Then you understand what I am asking you not to do." "I understand it," he said. "I'm not going to do it." The silence this time was different. Sharper. The kind that comes right before something breaks. And then Abigail Whitmore picked up her traveling case. Walked forward. Stopped in front of Gideon. Every single person on that drive held their breath. Abigail was smaller than Clara had always thought of her. Or maybe she just looked smaller here outside, against the scale of the estate and the mourning, and the weight of what was happening. She looked up at Gideon, and her expression was the most honest Clara had ever seen on her face. Stripped of the parlor performance. Stripped of the careful prettiness that had been her armor for 2 years. "She's good," Abigail said. "Just that." Gideon looked at her. "I know. She doesn't want to be in this position. I know that too." Abigail nodded. Once. Short and decisive. The nod of someone settling something internally that had nothing to do with anything on the outside. "My family will manage," she said. "We have before." She glanced past him to where Clara stood in the stable doorway. "Don't waste it," she said directly to Clara, not unkindly. Then she walked to her carriage, handed her case up, and climbed in. Clara felt the words hit her somewhere below the sternum and stay there. Eleanor Harrington turned. She looked at Clara for the first time, fully directly with the particular attention of a woman who was now accounting for something she had previously chosen not to account for. The look lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she looked at Gideon. "Inside," she said. "Both of you." The meeting took place in the study, not the parlor. Clara had never been in the study. It was a working room. Papers, ledgers, the dense accumulation of a household's actual business, and being in it felt different from the performative spaces she'd moved through since arriving. This was where the real decisions happened. She understood instinctively that Eleanor bringing her here instead of the parlor was its own kind of statement, though she wasn't sure yet what it meant. Eleanor sat behind the desk. Gideon stood. Clara stood near the door, not blocking it, just near it in the position of someone maintaining their own exit as an option. "Sit down," Eleanor said to Clara. "I'll stand," Clara said. Eleanor looked at her. "You're not what I expected." "I'm not here to be what you expected," Clara said. "I'm not sure I'm here at all by choice. And yet you're here." Eleanor folded her hands on the desk. "Let me be direct with you, Ms. Whitmore. Please. You have nothing. No name, no money, no family of standing, no education beyond what necessity has taught you. You are by every measure this society uses entirely unsuitable." She said it without cruelty, which was somehow more cutting than cruelty would have been. "You are also clearly not entirely without quality. Otherwise, my son would not be standing in this room, making the worst decision of his adult life." "Mother," Gideon started. "I'm speaking to Miss Whitmore." Clara met Eleanor's eyes. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to understand what you're walking into," Eleanor said. "If you stay, if this, whatever this is, continues, I want you to understand that this county will have opinions. Loudly. I want you to understand that there are people whose goodwill this family depends on, who will withdraw it. I want you to understand that whatever romantic notion my son has constructed around a storm and a carriage wheel and a kitchen conversation, the reality of what comes after is considerably less." "Eleanor," Gideon's voice was very quiet. She stopped. "That's enough," he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, the first real shift Clara had seen underneath the control. Not defeat, something older and more complicated than defeat. The particular grief of a person who sees a choice being made that they cannot stop and have already started grieving the consequences of. "You're certain?" Eleanor said to her son. "Yes." You understand what you're giving up. I understand what I was never going to have. The room was very still. Eleanor looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked at Clara. Tell me one thing, she said. Honestly. All right, Clara said. What do you want? Eleanor's voice had changed. Not softer exactly, but different. The question landed differently than Clara had expected. Not as a test, not as a trap. As something genuine underneath all the armor. Not what my son wants for you. Not what this situation has put in front of you. What do you, Clara Whitmore, actually want? The question sat in the center of the room. Clara looked at Eleanor Harrington, this woman who had built 40 years of careful architecture around her family's survival. Who was watching that architecture develop a crack? Who hadn't accounted for? Who was underneath the management and the precision and the impeccable composure, asking a real question? I want to matter, Clara said. Not to a household, not to a function, to something real. Eleanor held her gaze, and then very slowly, very privately, in a way that Clara thought almost certainly no one else in that room was meant to see, Eleanor Harrington closed her eyes. Open them. Leave us, she said to Gideon. He looked at Clara. Clara nodded once. He left. The door closed, and Eleanor Harrington looked across the desk at the girl her son had followed into a storm, and said very quietly, Then, you need to understand exactly what mattering in this family will cost you. Because it will cost you. And I need to know before I decide whether I am your enemy or not, whether you are the kind of woman who has already calculated that and chosen anyway. Clara held Eleanor's gaze without blinking. I've been calculating it, she said, since 4:30 yesterday afternoon. Something moved in Eleanor's face, fast and then gone, but Clara caught it. It looked almost like respect. Sit down, Miss Whitmore, Eleanor said. This time, Clara simply sat. The conversation stretched on for 2 hours. She knew this because she heard the grandfather clock chime 9, then 10. When Eleanor finally rose from behind her desk and moved to the window, the house around them had fallen into a profound stillness. It was the kind of quiet that signaled the last carriage had departed, the morning having slipped away unnoticed. Eleanor remained by the window for a long moment, her back to Clara. Her posture was as rigidly controlled as it had been at 8, or 7, or likely at 5 that morning, when she'd first begun to orchestrate the day's affairs. Yet, something in her shoulders had subtly shifted. Not broken, but altered, as if a structure had absorbed a weight it wasn't built to bear and was now silently assessing its capacity to hold. My husband, Eleanor began, her voice a low murmur, chose me because my father's land bordered his. It was a practical arrangement. Sensible. Everything a proper union was meant to be. She paused. He was kind to me. I want you to understand that. He was genuinely kind, and I was grateful for it. Every single day, knowing so many women whose husbands were not. Another silence. But gratitude isn't the same as being seen. I spent 30 years being managed well, and seen, almost never. Clara remained silent. I'm telling you this, Eleanor continued, so you understand that I'm not entirely devoid of comprehension regarding what my son is reaching for. She turned then, her face composed, but her eyes betrayed a deeper unrest. I'm also telling you that comprehension and approval are not the same thing. I understand it. I'm not certain I can approve it. You don't have to approve it, Clara said, her voice measured. It's not mine to ask for. No, Eleanor conceded, it's his. Which is precisely the problem, because he truly desires it. And I learned 20 years ago that arguing with that particular quality is a waste of everyone's time. She sat back down, her hands clasped in her lap. So, practically speaking? Practically speaking, Clara echoed. You have no money. No. No family connections of any use. No. No education beyond. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. Actually, what do you possess, Miss Whitmore, educationally? Clara met her gaze. I read Latin, some Greek, enough French for conversation, mathematics through accounting, she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. I kept the books for the Whitmore household for 18 months, when their steward left, and they couldn't immediately replace him. I know horses. I know basic medicine. I know how to manage a staff. Having been managed by enough of them, to understand what works and what doesn't. She paused. I also know which families in Providence are in debt, and which are managing it discreetly, which ones are connected to which Boston merchants, and roughly what the Harrington estate's annual expenses should be, based on the staff size and acreage I've observed. Eleanor Harrington remained unnervingly still. How do you know that last part? She inquired. Mrs. Hale talks when she thinks no one is paying attention, Clara replied, and I always pay attention. A beat of silence, then Eleanor spoke, Latin. My father was a school teacher, Clara explained, before he died. And after he died. After he died, I was 17, with a dead school teacher's library and no money. So, I found the Whitmores and made myself useful. She stated it plainly, not for sympathy, but for simple accuracy. Eleanor absorbed this information with the same thoroughness she seemed to apply to most things, without visible reaction, filing it away internally for later processing. Gideon Stewart, Eleanor said slowly, retired in March. We haven't replaced him. Clara met her gaze. I am not making you an offer, Eleanor stated immediately. I am thinking aloud, something I rarely do, and I would appreciate it if you did not make a habit of reporting it. She rose again, seeming to think better on her feet. Clara was beginning to realize. I am going to speak with my son. You will remain here. Will I? You are not under orders, Eleanor said, her diction as precise as a woman carefully calibrating her own language. You are being asked to wait. There is a difference. She walked to the door, paused, and turned back. Miss Whitmore? Yes. The letter he gave you last night? Clara's hand instinctively moved toward her pocket. I know about the letter, Eleanor said. I know what it contains. I know what it represents. She looked at Clara steadily. Did you decide? Clara held her gaze. I'm still here. Eleanor studied her for 3 long seconds. Yes, she said quietly. You are. And she walked out. Clara sat alone in the study for 20 minutes. She didn't examine the papers on the desk. The thought didn't occur to her. Or rather, it occurred, and she set it aside. Because whatever was transpiring today, she was determined not to be the person Eleanor Harrington had expected her to be. She sat, thinking, listening to the house, and trying to organize the morning into something she could comprehend. The door opened without a knock. It wasn't Gideon. It was a woman Clara hadn't seen before. Older, perhaps 50, with the bearing of someone who had traveled extensively and arrived recently, accustomed to entering rooms and having them subtly rearrange themselves around her. She wore a deep blue dress that showed signs of several days' travel but seemed unfazed by it. After a moment, Clara realized she had Eleanor's eyes, not the color, but the quality. That particular, focused intelligence. You're the girl from the stable, the woman stated. Yes, Clara replied. Good. The woman sat down uninvited in the chair Eleanor had vacated. I'm Margaret Harrington, Gideon's aunt. I arrived 20 minutes ago from Salem, which is why no one has had time to arrange their faces yet. She looked at Clara with the direct, unceremonious attention of someone who had decided to skip several preliminary steps. My sister-in-law sent a writer to me 3 days ago before the gathering. She had concerns about Gideon's intentions. Clara absorbed this. She was worried about him, Clara offered. She was worried about precisely this, Margaret continued. Which means she saw it coming and still couldn't stop it, which tells you something about my nephew. She tilted her head. And possibly something about you. I haven't done anything, Clara said. No one who has done anything ever says that, Margaret replied pleasantly. People who genuinely haven't done anything say this isn't what it looks like. She paused. You didn't say that. Clara looked at her, recalibrating. What did your sister-in-law want you to do? She asked. Reason with Gideon. Failing that, reason with the girl. Margaret's expression remained unchanged. I have met Gideon. I skipped directly to step 2, and I want to know what want. Not the carefully worded version you gave Eleanor. I could hear that conversation from the hallway. The house carries sound. But the real version, underneath it all. Clara looked at this woman she had known for 4 minutes and felt a strange, disorienting sensation, the feeling of someone refusing to let her be evasive, a sensation she was more accustomed to inflicting on others than receiving herself. "I want to not be managed," Clara said, "by anyone, including your nephew." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "He's not a managing kind of man," she said. "His mother is. His mother learned it as survival. There's a difference." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "My brother Gideon's father was a good man who spent his life being steered by systems he never questioned. Good systems, mostly, sensible ones, but he never questioned them. Gideon has been questioning them since he was 12 years old and figured out that the tenant farmers on the south parcel were paying rents that hadn't been adjusted since his grandfather's time, and that the numbers didn't make sense." A pause. "He adjusted them without telling anyone. Eleanor didn't find out for a year." Clara absorbed this. "He's stubborn," Margaret said, "and idealistic, in the peculiar way of people who are also genuinely intelligent, which makes it both better and worse. He will make your life complicated." She held Clara's gaze. "But he will not steer you." The door opened again. "Gideon." He stopped when he saw his aunt. His face flickered with a complex mix of relief and weariness, the expression of a man who loved someone and was acutely aware she was there for professional reasons. "Aunt Margaret," he said. "Sit down, Gideon," she replied. "I'm talking to your girl." "She's not." "Sit down." He sat in the remaining chair between them, placing him squarely in view of both women, a position he seemed to find uncomfortable and was managing with visible effort. "I told him about the letter," Margaret said to Clara. Clara looked at Gideon. "Which part? That he wrote it?" Margaret asked. "That he offered you an exit and that you're still here." "I told him that a man who hands a woman a door and waits to see if she walks through it is either very confident or very stupid, and that I haven't decided which yet." "It wasn't confidence," Gideon said quietly, his gaze on Clara. "I needed to know it was a choice, not a situation she was trapped in." "And if I'd taken it," Clara said, "then you'd have been gone," he replied. "And I'd have known." He looked at his hands briefly. "Something." "What something?" "That I was wrong about what I thought I saw," he said, "when I was standing at that window." The room fell very quiet. Margaret stood, smoothed her skirt, and announced, "I'm going to find Eleanor and tell her I've assessed the situation." She moved toward the door. "I'll also tell her that the girl reads Latin, which I suspect will do more work than anything else I could say." She paused in the doorway and looked back at Clara. "You're not what she expected." "People keep saying that," Clara replied. "Perhaps," Margaret said. "You should start taking it as information." And she left. The study felt larger with only 2 people in it. Gideon looked at Clara. Clara looked at Gideon. The fire had burned low. The clock on the wall read 10:43. "Your aunt," Clara said, "is formidable." "She's the person I learned from," he replied. "My father taught me to manage the land. Margaret taught me to look at what the land was actually doing." He paused. "She likes you. She spent 12 minutes interrogating me. For Margaret, that's practically a formal endorsement." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Clara, I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it without the layer of protection you put on everything. Can you do that?" She looked at him. "I don't know." "Honest answer," he said. "Try," she replied. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "Yesterday afternoon," he began, "when I saw you through the window, I want to be accurate about what that was. It wasn't that you were pretty, or that you were in distress, or that you were some kind of contrast to the room I was standing in. It was that you were fighting, just fighting, not for anything dramatic, for a carriage wheel in the rain, because it needed to be done, and no one was helping, and you were going to manage it yourself, or destroy yourself crying." He looked at her, and I thought, that's what I've been doing for 4 years. Alone, in a room full of people, and not one of them has noticed. Clara held very still. "I'm not asking you to fix that," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you for anything that isn't yours to give. I'm just," he exhaled, "I'm asking you to stay, not because of the estate, or because of what you'd gain, or what I'd gain. Just because I think we are something to each other that neither of us has had before, and I don't want to let that go without—" The door opened. Eleanor. Her expression conveyed that she had heard enough, or perhaps all of it, and had arrived at a conclusion. She looked at Clara. "The county assembly is in 3 weeks," she stated without preamble. "The Harrington family attends every year. It is the primary social event of the summer, and every family of consequence in this county will be present." She paused. "I would like to introduce you, properly, as a guest of this household." The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. "Mother," Gideon said carefully, "I am not finished." Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on Clara. "This will be managed with care. There will be a story, a truthful one, before you say anything, Miss Whitmore. Your father was educated. You are educated. You have been poorly circumstanced, not poorly formed, and that is a distinction this county is capable of making, if it is presented correctly." She paused again. "It will not be easy. There will be people who say things. There will be weeks that are harder than this morning, and this morning was not simple." "No," Clara said, "it wasn't. I am offering you, Miss Whitmore, my assistance in this, not my blessing. That is a longer conversation, and I am not prepared to have it today." Eleanor held her gaze. "My assistance, which in this county, I assure you, is worth considerably more." Clara looked at Eleanor Harrington, then at Gideon, then back at Eleanor. "Why?" she asked. "Because," Eleanor said, and something in her voice shifted. "Not much, but enough. My son looked at someone through a window yesterday, and for the first time in 4 years, he walked towards something instead of away from it." She held herself very straight. "And I have spent long enough watching the men in this family manage their grief by standing still." The clock ticked. "And?" Eleanor added with the crisp precision of a woman who would not let herself end on sentiment. "You keep books. We need someone who keeps books." Gideon made a sound that was almost a laugh. Clara felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. "I have conditions," Clara said. "Of course you do," Eleanor said. "I keep my own wages. Whatever arrangement is made, I have my own money separately held, not given earned. Reasonable. I take direction from you on social matters, because you know this county and I don't, but I don't take direction on anything that requires me to be something I'm not." Eleanor tilted her head. "Define something you're not." "Invisible," Clara said. "I've been invisible in other people's houses my whole life. I won't do it in this one." The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Whitmore," she said finally, "the last woman who said something like that in this house was me. In 1793, to my father-in-law." She paused. "It did not go smoothly." "No," Clara said. "I expect it didn't." "It also," Eleanor said very quietly, "worked." She turned and walked to the door with the same bearing she'd had when she walked in. Precise, controlled, 40 years of practiced composure, and stopped with her hand on the frame. "Dinner is at 6 o'clock, she said. "I expect you at the table, Miss Whitmore, not the kitchen." She paused. "Dress appropriately. Mrs. Hale will find you something." She left. The door clicked shut. Clara sat in the chair that Eleanor Harrington had occupied all morning and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle onto her. Not heavily, not crushingly, but solidly, the way real things settle. The things you can't walk back from. The things that, when you look at them honestly, you realize you chose even before you knew you were choosing. Gideon was watching her. "Are you all right?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me at dinner." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." She stood, smoothed her skirt, the practical gesture of someone organizing themselves for the next thing. Her hand, the cut one, barely throbbed anymore. She'd stopped noticing it sometime in the last hour, which seemed right. "Gideon?" she said. "Yes?" "The letter." She reached into her pocket, held it out to him. He looked at it, didn't take it immediately. "You're giving it back," he said. "I'm giving it back," she confirmed. "Because you don't need it." She thought about it. The honest answer, the one underneath. "Because," she said, "I don't want a door I can leave through. I want a house I chose to be in." He took the letter, held it for a moment. Then he walked to the fireplace, crouched down, and set it in the low embers. It caught slowly, then all at once, curling at the corners, the same way the contract had burned the afternoon before, and Clara stood and watched it go, and did not feel the loss of it, and understood for the first time, in a very long time, what it felt like to choose something real over something safe. The paper turned to ash, the clock struck 11, and in 3 weeks, Clara Whitmore was going to walk into the Whitmore County Summer Assembly on no one's arm but her own, in borrowed silk that she intended to earn the right to buy herself, and every person in that room was going to have to look at her and decide what they saw. She was already deciding what she'd look back with. The 3 weeks passed faster than Clara had expected, and slower than she could bear. She learned the Harrington household the way she learned everything, by paying attention to what people did when they thought no one was watching. She learned that Mrs. Hale unlocked the study at 6 o'clock every morning and stood in the doorway for exactly 1 minute before beginning her rounds, a habit that seemed to have no practical function and therefore probably had an important personal one. She learned that Gideon ate breakfast alone and worked through the morning without interruption, and surfaced at noon with the slightly unfocused look of a man returning from somewhere far inside himself. She learned that Eleanor took her tea at 4 o'clock in the west sitting room, and that this was the only hour of the day she allowed herself to stop managing anything, and that if you brought her a problem during that hour, she would listen to it with a patience she didn't display at any other time. Clara brought her problems at 4 o'clock. They were at first household problems. The south pasture fence that needed repair before the fall. A discrepancy in the grain accounts that no one had caught because no one had been looking carefully enough. A letter from a creditor in Boston that had been filed without being answered and had quietly accumulated interest for 4 months. Eleanor listened to all of them. On the 3rd day, she said, "You found that Boston letter in the correspondence files." "Yes," Clara said. "Those files haven't been properly sorted since March." "I know. I sorted them." A pause. "All of them?" "It took 2 evenings." Eleanor looked at her over her teacup. "How bad is the Boston account?" "Manageable," Clara said. "If it's addressed this week." Eleanor set down her cup. "Address it." Clara wrote the letter that afternoon. Gideon signed it. The account was settled by the end of the following week, and Eleanor mentioned it once briefly and moved on, which Clara understood was as close to praise as Eleanor Harrington ever came, in matters she considered simply competence. But the county was a different matter. The first indication came at 10 days out, when Mrs. Caldwell, the judge's wife from Concord, whose daughter had been among the 14, sent a letter to Eleanor. Clara didn't read it. She didn't need to. She was present when Eleanor read it, and she watched Eleanor's face do the particular thing it did when something required management, and she said, "How bad?" And Eleanor said, "Nothing we can't weather," which Clara had learned meant bad, but survivable. The second indication came from the servants' network, which was faster and more accurate than any formal communication system Clara had ever encountered. The story being told in Whitmore County, in the parlors, and the merchants' back rooms, and the church steps on Sunday morning, was not the story Eleanor had planned. Eleanor's version, the educated daughter of a schoolteacher, temporarily displaced, a woman of quiet quality, was there, but underneath it, persistent and spreading the way persistent things do, was the other story, the stable girl, the nobody, the woman Gideon Harrington had chased into a storm while 14 respectable families sat waiting in his parlor. Gideon heard it and said nothing. Clara heard it and said, "I need a dress." Eleanor looked up from the letter she was reading. "I told Mrs. Hale to not borrow," Clara said. "Mine. I need a dress that is mine. I'll pay for it from my wages. You can deduct it forward if there aren't enough yet. But I am walking into that assembly in something I own." Eleanor held her gaze for a long moment. "The seamstress in the village," Eleanor said, "is adequate but slow. The one in Salem is better. Margaret can arrange it." "Then ask Margaret," Clara said. Margaret, reached by letter, responded in 2 days with characteristic efficiency. She had already arranged it. She had also apparently described Clara to the seamstress in enough detail that when Clara arrived in Salem 4 days before the assembly, the woman looked at her once and said, "Yes, I see what she meant," and didn't ask a single unnecessary question. The dress was dark green, not fashionable, not what the Caldwell daughter would wear, or the Alderton girl, or any of the 14. It was the kind of dress that said, "I chose this. I know what I'm doing, and I am not trying to be what I'm not. Clara wore it for the first time in the Salem shop and stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize herself for a full 5 seconds. Not because she looked different, because she looked for the first time entirely like herself. She was back at the estate by nightfall. Gideon was in the drive when the carriage pulled in. Not waiting exactly. He had the look of someone who had happened to be there. And when she stepped out, he looked at her for a moment and said, "That's yours." "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. That was all. It was enough. The night before the assembly, Clara couldn't sleep again. Different from the first sleepless night. That one had been full of calculation, the hard arithmetic of risk and choice. This one was quieter, less about deciding, and more about sitting with what she'd already decided. She was in the kitchen at 5 o'clock in the morning, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. They looked at each other. Eleanor sat down across from her without being invited, which was new. "Tell me something," Eleanor said. "All right? Are you frightened?" Clara thought about lying. It would have been easy, the reflexive composure she'd built over years of being in positions where fear was a liability. But it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and Eleanor Harrington had sat down without being invited, and something about both of those things suggested the usual rules were suspended. "Yes," Clara said. Eleanor nodded slowly. "Good, good. People who aren't frightened before something like this are either very foolish or very numb." Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "I was frightened my first winter, as mistress of this house. Terrified. I had been trained for it my entire life, and I stood in this kitchen at 5 o'clock in the morning, the day of my first county dinner, and I was absolutely certain I was going to fail in front of everyone who mattered." "Did you?" "No." A pause. "But I was still frightened. The fright didn't mean I was wrong. It meant I understood what I was facing." She looked at Clara steadily. "You understand what you're facing?" "Yes," Clara said. "Then you're ready," Eleanor said. She stood, moved to the door, stopped. "Clara. First name, first time." Clara looked up. "My husband," Eleanor said, "would have liked you." She said it simply without weight, the way you stated a fact that didn't need decoration. He was a man who valued people who paid attention. She paused. "Gideon is very like him in that particular way." She walked out. Clara sat with that for a long time. The assembly was held in the Whitmore County Hall, a building that had stood since before the Revolution, and smelled accordingly of old wood and beeswax, and the accumulated weight of every social event the county had hosted for 40 years. It was full by the time the Harrington carriage arrived. Clara could hear it from inside the carriage, the hum of a packed room, the music weaving through the distinctive buzz of 100 people gathered in a space designed for exhibition. Eleanor descended first, then Margaret, then Gideon, who turned and offered his hand to Clara with the same unstudied grace he'd extend to anyone, no preamble, no performance, as if this were simply the natural order of things, as if no other version of this evening existed where she wasn't by his side. She took his hand and stepped down, and the sound from the hall, audible through the open doors, shifted. Not ceased, shifted. That subtle frequency change when a room that has been buzzing about something suddenly finds that something has arrived. Clara felt it ripple across her skin. She lifted her chin. "Ready, Gideon," she said quietly beside her. "No," she said. "Let's go." They entered. The first 10 minutes were the longest. Clara had braced herself for stares, and she received them. For that particular social hesitation, not quite silence but functioning as such, she got that too. She spotted Mrs. Caldwell by the east wall, her daughter beside her, and met the daughter's gaze directly, offering a nod. To her credit, the daughter returned it. She observed 2 unknown men conversing near the punch bowl, their voices ceasing as she and Gideon passed, resuming only when they had moved on. She kept walking. Margaret materialized at her left elbow with the practiced efficiency of someone who had positioned herself for this precise moment. "The woman in the red dress by the window is Mrs. Fenwick," she murmured. "She heads the Ladies' Auxiliary, which dictates terms to the charitable committee, which has opinions on everything. You want her on your side." "How?" Clara asked, equally softly. "She dismissed her steward 2 years ago and has been managing her own accounts ever since. Ask her how." Margaret offered a sidelong glance. She'll talk for 40 minutes, and by the end, she'll like you immensely. Clara found Mrs. Fenwick by the window 17 minutes into the evening. 43 minutes later, Mrs. Fenwick had introduced her to two other women, referred to Clara as Miss Whitmore twice, and Clara as Mrs. Fenwick once. She made an observation about the county grain accounts that Clara was able to follow with specific detail, a fact that appeared to delight Mrs. Fenwick considerably. It was working. Slowly, imperfectly, lacking the effortless polish of Gideon's mother or the social dexterity Margaret deployed like a finely tuned instrument. But it was working. People were talking to her, genuinely engaging. Some, she could sense, were drawn by curiosity, which was perfectly fine. Curiosity was a currency she could leverage. Others were talking to her because Eleanor or Margaret had subtly directed them, which was also acceptable. Managed goodwill was still goodwill. And then Judge Caldwell crossed the room. Clara saw him approaching and felt the shift before she understood it. That primal awareness of a situation's weight redistributing around a new center of gravity. Judge Caldwell, 60, silver-haired, possessed the kind of gravitas that came from decades of being the decider. He had the gait of a man who expected rooms to part before him. He stopped in front of Clara. Gideon, 6 feet away, was engaged in conversation with two merchants, and she saw him register the judge's movement and begin to extricate himself. She raised one hand slightly toward Gideon. "Stay." He remained. "Miss Whitmore," Judge Caldwell said. "Judge Caldwell," she replied. "I'll be direct," he stated. "I would prefer it," she responded. He studied her for a moment, assessing. "My daughter returned from the Harrington estate unharmed, but not untouched. She was 2 days quieter than usual, and for my daughter, that is saying something." He paused. "On the third day, she told me the most interesting conversation she'd had all afternoon was with a young man who asked her if she played the pianoforte because she enjoyed it. His expression remained impassive. She's decided she doesn't." Clara looked at him intently. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," he said. "She's been playing that instrument her entire life without enjoyment, and no one ever asked her before." He paused. "I'm not here to cause you trouble, Miss Whitmore. I am here to tell you that whatever comes of this," he gestured vaguely, encompassing the room, the evening, the entire affair, "my family will not be among those who impede it." He extended his hand. Clara shook it. He nodded once and walked away. Gideon was at her side within 30 seconds. "What did he say?" he inquired. "That his daughter has stopped playing the pianoforte," Clara replied. Gideon looked at her. "Is that good?" "I think so," she said. "Yes." The music shifted to something slower. The room began to reconfigure, orienting towards the dance floor. Margaret materialized, murmured something to Eleanor, and Eleanor turned, regarding Gideon with an expression that managed to convey both a command and a permission simultaneously. One of Eleanor Harrington's particular skills, Clara was beginning to learn. Gideon turned to Clara. "I should warn you," he said. "I'm a dreadful dancer." "I know," she said. "Mrs. Hale mentioned it. Mrs. Hale needs to find other topics of conversation." "Mrs. Hale," Clara said, "is a primary intelligence source, and I will not hear a word against her." He almost laughed, extending his hand instead. She took it. They moved onto the floor. He was, as advertised, not particularly graceful. He led adequately, but with the slightly strained attention of a man counting in his head, a trait she found unexpectedly, entirely endearing. She matched his rhythm. They found a cadence that was uniquely theirs, distinct from anyone else's. It wasn't elegant, but it was real, and the room could stare all it wanted. "Let them look," she thought. "Let them see exactly this." Mrs. Fenwick, from across the room, nodded at her. Eleanor, near the door, watched with an expression that suggested she hadn't yet fully come to terms with something, but was further along that path than she had been that morning. Margaret caught Clara's eye and raised her glass slightly. Clara looked at Gideon. He was watching her with the same intensity he'd displayed when standing at the study window 3 weeks prior. The kind of attention that didn't demand acknowledgement, that didn't announce or advertise itself, that simply was steady and complete. A man who had found what he was looking for and had no intention of looking away. "You're staring," she said. Yes, he replied. People will talk. They already are. Gideon. Clara. Gideon. Clara. Clara. He spoke her name with the same directness he applied to everything, unadorned. Let them. She met his gaze for a long moment. Then she laughed. A quiet, genuine sound. The laugh of someone who had, for a fleeting moment, stopped managing herself and allowed something real to surface. And she was surprised by its warmth, its lightness. And she thought, this is what it feels like. This particular sensation. Not precisely safety, not certainty. Something more honest than either. Being seen. After the music concluded and supper was served, as the evening settled into its slower, later rhythm, Clara stood by the window with a cup of punch she wasn't drinking, taking stock. She was in a room full of people who hadn't known her 3 weeks ago, whose opinions of her were still coalescing and would continue to evolve for months, perhaps years. She had no family name of consequence, no inherited standing, nothing behind her but the library of a deceased schoolteacher and 18 years of learning to be useful in other people's homes. She also possessed a dress she owned, an account she managed, a household that was beginning, truly beginning, to function around her presence rather than in spite of it, an adversary who, with considerable effort on both sides, was morphing into something akin to an ally, a man who had burned a contract for reasons that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with him, who had held out a door and waited, and who was, she had concluded, the most honest person she had encountered in years. And she had herself. That was not insignificant. It had never been insignificant. It had simply taken this particular Tuesday in July, in this particular county, amidst a storm she hadn't asked for, to remind her of it. Gideon came to stand beside her. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, observing the room. Mrs. Fenwick asked me, he said, whether you'd be available to consult on the charitable committee's accounts. Apparently, their current system has what she described as significant gaps. Their current system, Clara said, based on what she told me this evening, is a ledger from 1809 that no one has updated properly since 1812. Is that bad? It's fixable, she said, if someone pays attention. He glanced at her sideways. Someone like you. Someone exactly like me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, are you glad you stayed? She recalled the letter burning in the embers, the narrow cot behind the dressing screen, Abigail's carriage pulling away. The study at 8 in the morning, Eleanor's voice, a raw vulnerability beneath the armor. She thought of the stable in the rain, a man emerging without a coat because he couldn't explain himself, but also couldn't remain inside. Yes, she said it simply, completely. He exhaled something she realized he'd been holding, likely all evening, perhaps longer. Good, he said. Outside, Whitmore County continued to be itself. Its opinions, its calculations, its long social memory, all real, none of it final. Inside, the music began again. Eleanor moved through the room with the authority of a woman who had decided, on her own terms and in her own time, to move forward. Margaret was efficiently, deliberately making someone laugh near the punch bowl, and Clara Whitmore stood in the center of a room that had not known her name 3 weeks ago, in a green dress that belonged to no one but herself, beside a man who, during a storm, had looked through a window and chosen to walk toward what he saw. She had walked toward it too. That was the truth of it, plain and solid, hers to keep, not rescued, not selected like a name on a list, not maneuvered into position or managed into safety. She had burned her own exit and walked in through the front door, earning every inch of the ground she stood upon. And no one, not this county, not its opinions, not its long memory and longer judgments, could take that from her. Not today, not ever. She had chosen this, and this, at last, had chosen her back.